Last night I felt the storm coming fast, it broke the wall, scattered glass across the floor. I know this is the final war.
Welcome back to my channel, kings and especially my queens. This is Girl Be You, where everything and anything on this channel is focused on girl and women empowerment, and I am Coach Mo, coming at you today with a new video. So today's topic of discussion is going to be too emotional. Are you too emotional? Have you been told by people that you're too emotional? What does too emotional even really mean? You know, when you think about the scientific background of the word emotions or emotional or part of the behavior, it seems that based on different books and studies, emotions are basically the views of how one individual person perceives them. It's all in what a person decides in their mind, what they feel the word too emotional is. Now, how does too emotional relate to being empowered and being an empowered woman or girl? It matters a lot, because queens, when we talk to each other and we're having constructive conversations, and maybe negative feedback has to go back to the other queen that you're speaking with. Do you relate to saying if they respond in an emotional way in your mind, do you tell them that they're too emotional? Or do you take a step back and breathe and understand that the way a person may be receiving the feedback or the way a person may be understanding the current conversation has nothing to do with how you judge whether or not they're emotional or not? You know, I've heard people say when a person says you're something, 9 times out of 10, they are too. Because the equal saying is, it takes one to know one. So, you know, in the workplace, often, me personally, I'm told I'm too emotional. I am an emotional person. That is why I'm a community person. That is why I love doing what I do. I love helping people. Imagine a community person or a coach or a person who wants to help others lack emotion. It's really hard to ask a person to be able to separate the two, because being emotional is who I am as an individual, and if you have been told that you're too emotional, you possibly could be the same way. Now, after reading a couple of books, and I'll make sure I insert 2 books, one here is the Emotional Intelligence book, and the other one is EQ. These 2 books have really helped me understand the good and the bad, or the pros and the cons to being emotional, but also understanding the intelligence that comes with the word emotion, whether that be in the workplace, whether that be in your relationships, whether that be in any capacity. Emotions have a lot to do with how you are perceived and how you actually handle certain situations. So when you speak about the word too emotional, I like to remind people that a person that feels that you're too emotional may be seeing the fact that if you're in a constructive debate or discussion, did you take a breath before you responded? And I'm speaking to the person who's being told that they're too emotional. Now, before the person on the opposite side of the conversation decides to call the other person too emotional, did you take a break and a breath to sit back and say, should I even say that this person is too emotional? I think it's a two-sided coin. That's like saying to a person when you're talking to them, I think you have on too much makeup. You know, some things you may just not want to say because the other person, no matter how nice or low or soft your tone may be, it can still come across very harsh and very hurtful. So instead of telling someone that they're too emotional, maybe we work on saying things like, I see you're very vested in the conversation, and maybe this might not be the right time for us to discuss this conversation. Let's table this and come back to the discussion at a later time. How does that sound? That sounds so much better than a person who's having a conversation, whether that be at work or anywhere, and the only thing the other person says after you finish talking is, you're too emotional. You're just too emotional. It just doesn't sound right. It's almost like the one where they say, never start or end anything with a negative. So when we think about wanting to provide constructive feedback and constructive criticism to another person to empower them, we have to be careful with the words and the way we judge or perceive the person that we're trying to coach or give constructive criticism to. Now, to all my emotional queens, we are out there. I am an emotional person. We have work to do ourselves. So when you're having a conversation and you start to feel your body start to get hot or warm or any kind of response, because trust me, the next time you get into a conversation and a person tells you you're too emotional, take a moment and sit back and think, did anything different happen to your body? You know, did your mouth get dry? Did you start to sweat under your arms? Did any type of physical, did something physical happen? Because normally that's when your hormones and everything are starting to rage, and you're trying to understand how to communicate with someone who doesn't understand you. It's very difficult to have a conversation when someone basically thinks you're too much of something. You at this point feel that we're not on the same page and you honestly don't understand where I'm coming from. Now, how is that constructively handled? I feel if a person wants to give any type of constructive feedback, you have to get to know the person that you're giving the feedback to. You have to know their emotional intelligence. You have to know their learning style. You have to understand what makes them tick and what may make them go into a shell. That's so important when it comes to giving any type of constructive or feedback to any person in any fashion. So once you're told you're too emotional, I think the best thing to do is start to reevaluate yourself. How can you learn from the situation? What is it that happened that the person felt you were too emotional about? And is it something that they actually did that you can learn from? Because like I said in the earlier part of this video, sometimes when people call you something, then they're 9 times out of 10 just as much guilty as being that way themselves. So in that learning moment, was there something that the other person said that going forward in future conversations with other people you can refrain from saying? Was there a trigger word that caused you to feel like you weren't being listened to or taken seriously to the point where you felt you had to either increase your tone or you had to change your body language, you had to sit up a little bit more? What was it? You have to sit down and figure out what those trigger or those behaviors were that caused the person to feel that you were too emotional. The next thing that I would like to suggest when you think about being emotional and being empowered is understanding that too much emotion, depending on the situation, can sometimes hurt you. For example, knowing when to let something go. And if you didn't watch my previous video, I'll link it here as well. 10 tips to being an empowered woman. Letting go was one of those tips, because sometimes when a person feels you're too passionate, they just feel you didn't give up. They felt that, once the conversation and their point was made, that you should just settle with that point and keep it moving. So in their mind, if you continue the conversation and you continue to voice your opinion, they then feel at that point you're too emotional. Now, there's no right or wrong to either one of these feelings. It's all upon the individual themselves. Could the person who's on the other side calling you too emotional not be emotional enough to understand that there's always two sides to every type of conversation that you have, whether a person agrees with it or whether it is the last say? I like to say, even in the workplace, when a person is giving a directive that does not have an opportunity for that directive to be changed, a person should make sure they enter that conversation with that information. Because if you have a team full of people who feel that their opinion is valuable, they feel comfortable that if you're communicating with them, they're allowed to come back and put in their point of view or their opinion. However, if it's a conversation where the directive has been approved, there is no in doubts about it, try to say, how can I figure out and make sure the person that I'm going to give this message to understands that at this point, this will not be up for debate. It is the actual end of the line, and this is it. So that conversation may sound something like, I wanted to bring up to your attention a different policy that we were discussing that you were very vested in and had great feedback on. We've addressed this different policy, and at this point, there is no wiggle room for any type of changes or amendments to whatever that so-called policy is. But I would like for you to tell me and write down or either email me what your opinions are regarding that policy, because if there ever is an opportunity to amend or change, I would like to have your valuable feedback because I appreciate you on our team. That sounds so great. Instead of a person telling you that, you know, this is the way it is, and unfortunately there is no way to change it, so I don't really want to, it's not up for debate. I don't really care basically what you're telling me. So I think when we think about too emotion, sometimes the person who wants to put their foot down can be too emotional themselves. So I wanted to just bring these couple of tips as I'm reading my emotional intelligence and my EQ book. I wanted to share that information with you because I feel that understanding emotional intelligence, understanding different people's language and coaching styles are definitely key to understanding how to empower others and in return be empowered yourself. So I hope you enjoyed this quick video on Are You Too Emotional? And as I say at the end of every video, be you because everyone else is taken. Thank you, and I look forward to talking to you on our next video. Have a good one.